Hi everybody and welcome to the Professional Diploma in Photoshop. Welcome to Module 2, Lesson number 4. You are here with myself, William Eames. So glad that you made it back for this lesson, the second part of our advanced masking tutorial. Remember, if you've got any questions at all throughout the lessons, you can always ask me and ask Morpheus. Keep rating those responses so that we can continually improve them for you. And anything outstanding, you can reach out to us at support@shawacademy.com. So, as I mentioned, we're into the second part of our advanced layers. In the first lesson, lesson number 3, we had a look at revising our layer types. We touched on layer masking, we had a look at masking and selections, and we dug deeper into our blend modes. We're going to take things up a level now. We're going to have a look at double exposures. We'll talk about how to add shadows to our images, creating shadows. We'll also have a look, we'll kick things off by looking at dodging and burning, how we can use dodging and burning to improve the depth, the shadow details and the highlight details within our photos. Okay, so let's have a look at some dodging and burning. So we had a brief look at this in the previous lesson, and dodging and burning is something that if you are familiar with film photography and with darkrooms, it's actually something that comes straight out of the darkroom. So dodging and burning was used to either add light to a part of an image or to take away light from a part of an image. So basically when we had our images in the enlarger, we had our negative slip in the enlarger, the image was projected down onto our photographic light sensitive paper. We were able to block out parts of the light if we wanted to dodge. We used to make a little tool that was basically, a bit of cardboard, black cardboard on a stick, which is what you're seeing here, to block the light. Our burn was when we covered the rest of the image and we let a little bit of light pass through using our hands. That's why you've got the two kind of dodge and burn symbols there. Now, with dodging and burning, like everything in Photoshop, there's ways of doing it destructively and non-destructively. So we're going to just duplicate our layer here. Okay, so we're going to call this layer burn. We're going to call this layer dodge. So dodging and burning, it can be used in anything really, but it's primarily used in photography. Okay, so we generally would use it if we want to add a little bit of light or take a little bit away, a little bit of light in an exposure in a particular area of a shot. So say, for example, I pick the dodge tool here. I'm going to use a large brush. Okay, so it does act exactly like a brush. We've got an exposure of 50%. We are selecting our mid-tones, but it is also possible to just select shadows and highlights as well. If you want to only affect the exposure in the shadows or the highlight areas, mid-tones is going to affect the majority of the photograph. 50% is fairly high on the exposure. I'd usually have it a lot less than that, but we just exaggerated here just for the effect. So when we start to dodge, okay, so we paint in, and you can see it is actually quite subtle to begin with. Now it may not be so obvious to begin with initially. I'm just going to paint down the hand there, okay, and along the neck here. So we're kind of just brightening up the skin. Now I'm just going to turn off my my burn layer for now. So if I kind of just do a quick on and off on the dodge, you can kind of see that the skin definitely has a bit more tone to it. It's got a much lighter tone here to it when I've used my dodge. I can increase this as well. If you keep going over it, so you're going to build up on it. So just like if we saw with our masking when we're using our brushes, if you keep painting in, it's going to get either lighter or darker and darker to the point where you're going to begin to lose your detail. Okay, so that's far too much in this particular case. Now this is also destructive as well, because I'm actually applying this to the pixels that have to undo it and undo it and undo it to get it back to its original state. Let's switch that layer off for now. Let's have a look at burn. So burn is the opposite. We could simply burn in and make the skin or this any kind of tone darker. Again, we'll just reset this back to 50. And we just start painting it. And again, you can kind of see the difference here straight away. Okay. So we're adding quite a bit of a tan here to the model in this particular case, and it's just simply far too dark. Okay, so that's our before, this is our after, and again, if you keep going over, you're really going to build up that burn effect. So that's our extreme dodging, this is our extreme burning. Okay, so either of those ways is really not the way that we're going to want to be using the dodge or burn tool. What we want to do is we want to do it obviously in a more subtle way. We also want to do it in a non-destructive way as well. And this is where our layer comes in. So we're going to make a brand new layer. We're just going to hit the plus option here. We've got a brand new blank layer. And then what we can do, we're going to fill that layer in by coming up to edit. We're going to go to fill, or shift F5, and we want to choose our 50% gray. We want to choose overlay, okay, and we leave the opacity at 100. We don't want to preserve transparency, so we just click OK, and what we should end up with then is a gray layer, as we can see here. Now it hasn't changed to overlay there for some reason. That's okay. We can just click it off there and choose our overlay, and that allows us to see through it. Now what we can do is we can start using our blend, or sorry, not our blend, our dodge and burn tools here to actually make changes to this layer instead of the actual pixel layer. Okay, so say for example I wanted to just add a little bit more brightness here. I'm going to change the exposure down just a little bit, and I start to paint in along the nose there. You can see that just about we've a very, very faint outline of where I painted in that dodge. Okay, we can do the same with burn. So say if we wanted to contour the face a little, you know, you can bring in your burn there. We can go the other side here as well. And again, you can see here on our gray transparency layer where we are essentially painting in, and you can almost begin to see the shape of the face. Okay, so this is a much better way of using our dodging and burning tools. So, you know, if you're any good with actually applying makeup, you're probably going to be able to make a great use of this in a portrait, in an example like this. But of course, we're not limited to just using it for something like this. Of course, we can use it in other ways. Okay. So again, you can really kind of see the shape of the face there, and just do a quick before and after. And you can see we've really almost changed the lighting, the way the light is falling onto our subject's face. It's quite dramatic actually. Okay, so that's how we can dodge and burn. Let's have a look at another example here. So here's kind of a more classic landscape example. We're going to unlock our background. We're going to duplicate this layer. I want to turn this into black and white. Okay, so we're going to add a black and white adjustment layer. And you can add your contrast or anything like that if you like green filter, quite exaggerated that is really. I think we'll just leave it at default there. We won't start messing around too much with that. I'm going to just make this a clipping mask here as well. So we just click on that. Try that again. Sorry, I'm just messing. There we go. Create a clipping mask, and there we go. We've got that just applied to our layers. This is simple black and white adjustments. Now we want to bring in our brand new layer. We want to do the same here again. We want to go edit. We want to go fill. We've got all our settings from the last time. We just click OK on that again. I don't know why it's not selecting the overlay there for me. That's absolutely fine. Now we have our overlay. Okay, so here what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my dodge tool. This is really like something we'd be doing in a dark room. And again, remember you can change your options here, the size of your brush, everything like that here as well. But I'm going to use my dodge tool. I'm going to paint along the road. Okay, so you want to adjust the size of that there as well. I'm going to come back down over it again. So we really want that road to pop out. Okay, so you're just painting in along there. And you could go all the way down if you like. I don't think I need to do so much. And you can see where you're kind of tracing over here in your layer over there. Now we can go to our burn tool. I want that road to stand out. So I'm going to make the the kind of shrubbery and the grass and everything around it quite dark. So we just paint in over it there. And as I said, you can kind of just keep building it up. And again, you can see exactly where you're painting in via your layers here. Now, if you like, of course, you can also create a second one of these so that you're keeping your dodging on one layer and you're keeping your burning on another layer. Okay, that way you could also actually increase or decrease the opacity as you like. Now here in the distance you could even do even more, and I would recommend that you get in closer. But if I was again just to change to my dodge tool, you can just go across the top of the hills there so that they're really catching that light. And again, if you want to contrast that, we can bring in our burn tool and just go along the bottom. Again, you're actually beginning to, it's almost like you're painting in that picture. Let's just do a quick before and after. So that was the original shot. This is with our dodging and burning. Probably gone a little bit too much there on the edges. I'd need to just undo that. 50% exposure was far too much. What I would recommend is that you do start at a much lower percentage and you very, very slowly build it up. Because remember, you can control it. You can control by just simply going over and over. But if you start very, very high, obviously then it's going to be more difficult to go back down and to make an adjustment to it. So that's our original. That's with our dodging and burning. The road certainly stands out, but the dark tones are getting a little bit muddy. But it should give you an idea of the power of dodging and burning, and this can be used for pretty much any single type of photograph. So double exposures, we had a look at double exposures back in the final lesson of module number 1. But we're going to have a look at a simplified version of doing our double exposures through highlighting our blend modes, where we simply take two images together and we combine them to create a double exposure. We'll run through 3 different variations that you can do and that you can try out at home. So let's do some masking. So at the end of module 1, we had a look at how to do a double exposure using our masks, and we did something quite complicated in that lesson where we were using multiple layers. But masking doesn't have to be as complicated as that, or creating a double exposure doesn't have to be as difficult as that. You can start off very, very simply and slowly build up. So we'll have a look at a few examples and we'll slowly build up to that more complicated double exposure. So let's start by taking something very simple like this cityscape here, and we're going to bring it into this image here, and we're going to create this kind of double exposure, kind of common type of double exposure, popular type of double exposure, where you have a person with kind of cityscape within them. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to resize our image to somewhere where we want it to be. I don't want it to be taking over the entire person here, so we're going to just reduce the opacity down first of all here, just to see exactly where it is. I'm going to try and keep it below the kind of beard line, just about keeping in the body there. Okay, so one of the things about this is that we already have a white background, which makes life a lot easier for us. Really, for double exposures to be effective, we need to be using a white background. But with this selected, I can then begin to cycle through my different blend modes. And you can already begin to see the effectiveness of simply cycling through those blend modes. And we're going to be looking at kind of the lighting ones and the contrast ones here, not the darken ones, because that will get rid of the city for us, but it'll keep the sky, as you can see there. But because we're using a white background, we want to be using either the light ones or we want to be using the contrast ones. Now, of course, if we had a dark background, which you can do this with, of course, as well, we'd be looking at these other ones, but it'd be less effective. Okay, so the lighting one isn't too bad at all. You can see it really brings the image through quite well. The hard light one is also nice too. Nice punch of contrast there with that. So I think I'll actually go with the hard light one here. Now, as you can see, we have an issue here where we've got the edges appearing. So what we want to do then is we want to create a mask. Okay, so we just simply click and create a mask, and then we could begin to paint away those areas that we don't need. Okay. Now, of course, one of the issues with that is that, it'd be quite difficult to make sure that we actually have, we're staying within the line. So what we can do actually here is we can select our person here. We'll just switch that off. We'll just quickly use our quick selection. Okay, so just undo that. Make sure we have the right layer selected. We go to our quick selection here again, and we can just click and drag down. Very quickly create our selection here. Don't need to worry too much about the selection here at the top. It's mainly the shoulders and that. If I switch back on my layer then, I can just bring in my brush and I can make sure I have my mask selected, and I can start to paint out and paint away the parts of the image that I do not need. Now, it's not painting away for me there because there's one step I've neglected. And that's, of course, I need to inverse as well. So we just need to go and find our inverse. There we go. Now I should be able to paint that away when I select my mask. So you can kind of see all the steps here. You have to make sure that you're taking every single step. Usually, like I've said before, I leave these slight mistakes in the lessons because I so often get students ask me, I've tried this and it's not working out the same way for me. What am I doing wrong? And it always comes down to just usually a very, very simple step. Okay. Now I'm just painting in the rest of it here. As you can see there on our mask, then we have our outline of our gentleman. Now we still need to also get rid of a little bit of it here. As we can see, it's kind of in the beard. So in this particular case, then what we're going to do is we're going to just deselect this for now. And we can just make our brush smaller. We can bring it down. We can just start painting over the beard. And indeed, we can paint over. We can go a little bit easier here to do the painting. We can paint down and we can just bring out that tie a little bit more. Okay, now to really add a little bit more then to this to really make it interesting. Now I see a little bit here that I should have painted away that might actually be on this layer itself. So, but we'll just leave that there for now. But to make this a little bit more interesting, we can actually add a black and white filter to the whole thing. Okay, because double exposures again tend to be a little bit more effective when they are in black and white or grayscale, as we can see here. Now we want the whole thing to be black and white, so we can stick with using just a layer above, just a layer above it. We don't need to create a clipping mask in this instance, and you can of course then edit it to whatever way you prefer. Now, one thing I do want to just do here is I want to add another adjustment here because I want to bring up the levels of that a little bit. So in this case, I will add a clipping mask just for the adjustment layer, just to bring up the brightness of that ever so slightly. Okay, and there we go, an effective looking, very straightforward double exposure. Let's have a look at doing some more examples of this. So let's work on a slightly more complex double exposure. Okay, so this one, we're going to use this image here again, but we're going to apply this image over instead. What I want to do in this instance is I want to create a hairline that's made up of the forest. Okay, so I'm going to drag it over the image and click OK on it. Let's just have a look at our opacity. And you can see kind of what I'm talking about here already. I'm going to move this up because I want the trees here to basically make the top part of her head. So we'll drag that out a little bit more, and I'm happy with how that looks. With this layer selected, okay, so before we do any of the blend modes, I want to make a selection. So we're going to make a quick selection here. And we're going to just invert that, so Control-Shift-I to invert, or we're going to make a mask. Select and mask. That's fine. We can refine that edge a little bit more, move the radius out. Very, very quick kind of refine edge over there as well. We won't spend too much time on that. Happy with that. We're going to go a layer mask. Okay. Now, so with this layer mask, I actually want to drag it down here instead. Okay, and then if I start to go through my different options here, you can see the kind of the tree line there going across the top. Now, before I go any further as well, I just want to desaturate these two layers. So if I come up to my image, I'm going to go to adjustments, and rather than applying a black and white, I'm actually just going to desaturate them all together, which is just basically removing all of the color out of them altogether so that we're just working purely grayscale. Now I can start to cycle through my different options. Okay, so lighting looks well. That looks pretty well. I like the color dodge there. Now you can also see some of the trees coming in through here as well. So I'll remove them a little bit later, but I think I'm going to go with something like lighting. I think lighting works. Now, as you can see here as well then, we've got this kind of, we can see the background of the sky from the original image here. So we need to add a new layer. So we're going to add a new layer as a background, and we're simply going to fill that in using white. Okay, and you can see there already the effect that has had. So now we just need to make a layer mask here now as well. So we just add our mask, sorry, wrong one there, and we can then begin to paint away. Okay, so we can start to remove some of the trees here and some of them there in the face. So just paint over, there we go. So if you didn't want them coming through here and you just kind of want them coming through the top there, we can just begin to paint away. And indeed you could select this layer here and have some of the white come through there as well, whatever you prefer. I might just cycle through some of these options again, so see if there's something that better suits. Just undo some of that and we can just cycle through. Because I do want some more of those branches coming through to see, so we can see it's kind of a forest. Okay, that's a little bit better. I like that one. So with this selected then, we can begin to paint away. Okay, so that's how you can kind of create that type of double exposure effect where you still have, you can kind of see the tree line there coming through. And you can kind of just modify that then whatever way you wish if you wanted to have some of the forest coming through there below. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So let's do one where we're working on something slightly different. So one of the most popular things to do when it comes to double exposures is to do something that is environmental, and it is also something that's very, very relevant for us given the climates that we live in and everything to do surrounding climate change and conservation. So we have an image here of a polar bear, and we also have glacier here as well. So let's bring these two images together here first of all. Okay, with this we're going to use a black background instead. So we're going to just remove our layer 1 here for the moment. We're going to make a selection here around our bear. Now, so one of the most popular things that we can do with our double exposures is to use them for statements, you know, to show something quite powerful. And as we all know, you know, at the moment things are very, very difficult for us and difficult for the planet in terms of climate change. I'm sure we're all familiar with the documentaries of polar bears, you know, that are struggling to survive, etc. So we can think about how we can use our creative abilities to say something more. So we're going to create a double exposure here using this glacier and using this polar bear. So we're just going to unlock our layer here first of all, double click on that, and we will unlock this layer here, and we just need to drag and drop this over as per usual. I'll just try that again. That's the wrong one. Try to get, come on, let's go again. There we go, eventually. So we can kind of just place this where we want, roughly. I'm going to place it around here. Remember just to reduce your opacity just to see exactly where it's placed. I'm going to move it over just a little bit because I want some of those mountains to come through the background here as well. Okay, so we're going to select our bear. So we'll just undo that for now. We're going to just use our quick selection, very, very fast. Okay. Make sure you've got the right layer selected as well. Okay, and I'm just going to do a very, very quick refine edge. So we're going to go select and mask, and as you can see, I forgot to select the nose there, so we're going to cancel that. There we go. Now we can go our select and mask. And I'm just going to do a very, very quick refine. So we're going to just bring out the edge detection a little bit here. Just very, very quickly go over the edges there. Just super, super fast. Okay, so we could do it just getting rid of a little bit there. And yeah, I mean, that's good enough. So we can just click OK. We want to output this with simply just a layer mask. There we go. There's a little bit of an edge there. It's not too bad. And if I switch back on my layers, I can begin to cycle through whichever option is best for me in terms of the blend modes. Now, before I do that, here's a very, very neat trick to show you. When I've got my layer mask selected, if I press the control key or the command key on a Mac, you see that my hand now comes up with a little selection. Okay, my hand comes up with a little selection. That means if I press this, as you can see, it creates a selection around the bear. It creates a selection around the mask that we made. With that, if I come up to my previous layer, my layer 1, and I create a mask, you can see it actually creates a mask in the shape of the selection. So we could have done that with our previous images as well, for sure. But when you've created your mask on your object, if you press the control or command key, you can create a selection around it. You can then use that selection when you create a new mask. Okay, so now with that, we can start cycling through our different blend modes. Let's see what one is the most appropriate for us. I think overlay might be the way to go. Hard light works very, very well actually as well. So I think we'll go with the hard light one. And as you can see, we need to do a little bit of refining here. So first of all, we're going to add a new background to this. I'm going to add a black background to this in this case. We'll do something different. So we'll go down to our OK, bring that down to the back. We don't want to replace the layer mask. We want to make a new layer. There we go. And then we can come back up to our previous layer mask, and we can start to paint away and refine things a little bit. I'm going to reduce the opacity down a little bit there, paint in over that, and just blend things nicely. Okay, so as you can see, you can create kind of statements with your double exposures, and you know, I'm quite pleased with how that looks. So definitely something to try out. But remember, the main thing there, the main takeaway from that is that when you've created your selection, you press the control and you press the click, you're going to be able to create a selection that you're then going to be able to use as a mask. Okay, so that's our different layer masks and our different exposures. We had our previous one here with the kind of tree line. We had our original one with the gentleman and the cityscape. Now we have this statement type one here as well. So let's move on to something else. Let's move on to something a little bit different, and let's have a look at adding shadows into our photos. So there's going to be times where we're working with either vectors or images like this basketball here, or perhaps we've done a little bit of photography and we need to do a little bit of correction to things like the lighting and indeed to the shadows as well. Adding shadows will add depth to your photographs and to your images and give a little bit more perspective. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go through different types of shadows that you can add to your images. I'm just going to create a very new, very fast, quick document with a white background. Just going to drag and drop my basketball onto that and just resize that, and we can go through a couple of the basics when it comes to adding shadows. So the first thing to do is when we're adding and working with shadows is that, and I'm sure you've experimented with this already, we're going to find our shadows with our effects options. Okay, so we want to start off with our drop shadow. So we go to our effects, we go to our drop shadow, and we've got lots of different options available to us. Some of these should be very, very familiar to you now. Lighten isn't going to work because it's going to remove all the dark tones. So we're going to want to go with something like darken if we're using a white background, which indeed that's what we'll do. But you've got lots and lots of different options there as usual available to you. Opacity will change the density of that shadow. As you can see there, we can make it much, much darker. We can begin to move the shadow around as well. I'll show you more of that in just a second. So we want to make it more opaque. We increase the opacity. Obviously with shadows, they can be of different strengths. So if you want to reduce down the opacity, say somewhere to about 40%, you can see it's still a hard shadow, but it's a little bit grayer. We can change the distance if we want it to be further out from the object, from the subject, or we can get it much, much tighter within to the subject like that, thus creating more of a 3D effect. The spread is going to be the spread in the size of the shadow. It gives it a little bit of a hard edge as well as you kind of expand it out. And then size is the actual size itself. Okay. As you can see, we're kind of pushing the limits of it there when we increase the size that much. Okay. We can change the angle that it's coming from. So with the angle option here, as you can see, we've got this circle. You can type in the degrees that you like. But basically with the angle, the thing to remember is that where the line is facing, this is essentially where the light is coming from. So the shadow will appear on the opposite side. So if I push the angle up, the shadow goes down to the bottom. If I push the angle down, the shadow goes up at the top. And as you can see, anytime I'm doing that, we get a preview here around the square shape there as well. Okay, so you can choose now. If we have a look at this basketball, you know, logically, we can see that there's a bit of a highlight, a slight highlight there. So you'd want the shadow to fall on the opposite side. Okay, so you want to read the image where the light's coming from and make the shadow fall on the other side. And make it a little bit softer here as well. Maybe just a little bit closer. Okay, because remember, it's falling on that side, so the light's falling on that side, so logically the shadow falls on the opposite side. Okay, so that's a very, very basic look at our drop shadow and how we can very, very quickly add a shadow to an image. Okay, so we can also maybe find something that's maybe a bit of a lighter or a more suitable shadow type for this particular image. Okay, but that's it. That's a very, very basic. And as you can see, you know, if I just switch off my shadows, it already adds a little bit of perspective. Okay, now with that as well, as you can see, my layer has now changed ever so slightly. We have effects. So if I wanted to edit the effects, I can just double click on them here again. brings it back up, and I can start working away again and to change things as I like. And the amount of effects that you add here, you can switch them on and off if you were to add more effects. They will all be listed below. Now, let's look at adding a more complicated shadow to an object. So we're going to come over to our gentleman here again, do a very, very quick selection. Here again, we're not going to refine the edge, and we don't need to in this particular case. We do need to just inverse it, so Control-Shift-I, just going to take them out of this. We're going to drop them in here. Okay, so our drop shadow option here really isn't going to work. Just going to zoom out a little bit first of all. So we just enter there, zoom out, because he's far more larger than the layer that we're adding him onto. So we need to zoom out to grab our edges, and we just resize it as such. Okay, now again, now with this, obviously we're dealing with kind of two quite different images here. Okay, so the lighting here in the background is kind of a radial center type lighting, where very much the lighting falling onto the gentleman is you know, it's kind of coming in at an angle. We can tell from the eyes here. You should always use the eyes as an indicator as to where the light's coming from. There's actually two lights being used in this case, but the primary light source is coming in from the left hand side, okay, or his right hand side. The second light is a fill light. All of that covered on the photography course. Just a quick shout out to that course if you want to know more about lighting styles. So in this case, you want to again read the image and, you know, make sure that you're kind of following where the light is going to fall and where the shadows are logically going to fall here as well. Okay, so we're going to make a copy of this layer. So we now have two layers, two gentlemen here. Okay, we're going to switch this one off now just for the moment, and we want to start to apply changes to this layer. First of all, we want to make this layer black. Okay, so we can start applying some adjustments here. Now we're not going to do any adjustment layers. I'm just going to come up to our adjustments here at the top. We can just simply reduce or increase the contrast. In this case, we'll reduce the whole thing down. In terms of the brightness, I'm going to add another change to this as well. We can go with our exposure, which should have a big impact, and again just reduce it the whole way down. And there we go. Okay, so we just wanted to make it completely black, and then we can just go and we can deselect that. Switch on our layer here again, dropping behind it. Now, as you can see, we're already beginning to create that shadow effect. Okay, so we could change the opacity of that to try and make it look a little bit more natural. We could also we should be really feathering the edges of that there as well. But what we'll do is we'll select our transform, and with our transform option, if I hold shift, I can begin to really manipulate that shadow. Now remember, if you're using an older version of Photoshop, you don't need to hold shift. You can just grab the edges and grab the handles. But if you're using a newer one, you will need to hold shift to begin to manipulate the image. Now with the transform, we can do more than just kind of drag it in those different directions. It is also possible to bend and shape it. Okay, so if I come up to my edit options, I go to transform, we've got all these other options here like scale, rotate, skew, distort, perspective, and so on. So let's try and use one like distort. So when I select distort, as you can see, I can grab and I can begin to pull and push and tweak and move around that shadow even more. Okay, so it doesn't just have to be coming you know, parallel to it. You can change it so that it kind of follows the light. So remember, our light and you can very much see our shadow there is falling on to the onto our right, but onto the subject's left. So the shadow should really be following that logic. Okay. So we just wanted to try and bend this and twist it as much as possible to where we would logically expect it to fall. Now we can also select it again. We're not finished just yet, so we can come back up to our image, and we could go to our SKU as well, and we could again drag our handles out, our squares out, and we can lengthen that shadow too. Okay, so we could be here all day really. Now obviously the distance that you make that shadow is going to very much relate to the sense of distance between the subject and the background. But I think, something like that actually has a kind of a logical placement to it. We'll just erase it ever so slightly. Okay. Now, with your selection as well, of course, you could feather out those edges to soften out that background. We could change the opacity down on it, increase it, decrease it, to change the density of it. And indeed, we could also try out our different options here as well. So it's a soft light. There we go. So we're using a soft light there. It's a softbox that's used in the image. Using a soft light here gives it a more realistic effect. And I'm happy with that now. But you get the idea. We could be at that all day. So finally then, just to finish out this lesson, the last thing we're going to have a look at is adding shadows to something like this. So this shoe. Okay, so with this, very, very straightforward. We can kind of see the lighting here is coming from the top, and a little bit of a catch light here on the side of the shoe there. But again, if we think about it logically, a shadow would probably be appearing underneath the shoe. Now, of course, we can go with our effects, we can go with our drop shadow, and we could start to play around with our drop shadows that way and see what works best. But this is only really kind of making it appear and pop out of the page as such, when really what we wanted to do is we wanted to give it a sense of perspective, like there's a light coming from overhead. So what we can do in this instance is we can begin to use our gradients. Okay, so we want to select a gradient. So we can find our gradients when we go up to our paint bucket tool. Okay, when we select our gradients, we have our gradient options here at the top. Now, there's a lot of pre-made gradients here, but we can also make our own as well. We're just going to go with our simple black to white gradient here. We've also got black to transparent and etc. We also have different gradient types. We've got our simple kind of left to right. We've got a radial gradient. We've also got some other options available to us there, kind of a hard edge radial. We're going to select our radial one here. And all we have to do then is just simply click and drag, and as you can see, it creates our gradient for us. Now it's creating it over our image, which is exactly what we don't want, so we need to make a brand new layer. Okay, so we just simply go plus, create our new layer, and we can then use this for our gradient. Okay, so we can cycle through our different options here as well to allow the gradient to be seen, and to allow our shoe to be seen here as well. We could also select a different type of gradient where we could go with our transparent one instead. So if I just drag and drop that and get rid of that, we click our new one again. We could go with a transparent option here, and there we go. So rather than having the white there, kind of blocking everything, we can go with a transparent one, and it allows us to still see through it. Okay, as you can see, I placed it there in the corner, so it's kind of cut off the edge of it. Again, no good to us. So they are a little bit fiddly to begin with, but let's go again. Okay, so we're going to start, and we're going to switch off our shoe layer for now. We'll just do a small gradient here going from the center. Okay, perfect. So with that then, I can begin to move this gradient around, and we can place it logically again underneath our shoe. And again, using our transform tools, we can begin to manipulate the shape as we like. So we're going to go to our edit. We're going to go to our distort. So I want to just drag it over underneath the shoe. Okay, we'll just bring it up in the edge here. That's probably a little bit too big. Remember, you want to get the darkest part of the shadow underneath the shoe. Okay, so that's looking a little bit better. We can do a little bit more refining of that. And again, remember, we can change our opacity on this. We can also change our blend modes on this as well. None of them really being suitable in this case. Yeah, so we're not really finding anything that's particularly good there, having too much of an effect on it. So we'll just leave it as normal for now. Might just even make it a little bit smaller again. Okay. And of course, remember, we want to place it behind the shoe, so we just drag it down so it's below our layer. Of course, we can just then replicate that layer here again, and we can drag it underneath the heel, and we're going to need to make something much smaller for the heel. Okay, and as you can see there, by simply adding those two shadows, we've added this idea, this perspective to the image. And what we've actually done is we've created something where the shoe is actually looks like it's grounded within a studio. Now, of course, you can refine these even more. You can change the opacity of them even more if you like, but you can work on them a little bit to make them look a little bit more realistic by experimenting, changing your blend modes. You can also change the type of gradients that you're using. Where the gradient is coming from. We're using a radial in this case, but you can absolutely use different types of gradient as well. Okay, so that's a very fast way of adding a shadow to any object by using gradients. And I think that we've covered quite a lot in this lesson, so we'll leave it there for this lesson and finish out. Now, just a very quick recap there of your step-by-step on how to create and add shadows to your images. You'll find that in the slides in the toolkit. So that is the end of our lesson. Thank you so much for joining me for it. I do hope that you enjoyed this week. Our next lesson, we're going to look at something different. We're going to look at the brush tool. We haven't really explored the brush tool in great detail as of yet on this course. There's a huge amount that we can do with it. I'll have a look at how you can download and install different brushes, and how you can manage different brushes, and also how you can even create your own. Now, of course, for your challenge, a straightforward one, I'd like you to create a double exposure. It's something you did do before at the end of module 1. But with this one, I think I'd like you to try and bring two images together that say something. Like we had a look at the polar bear and the iceberg, and there's the kind of idea about climate change in that image. I want you to think about the images that you're bringing together and what kind of statement that they make. So, thank you all for completing this lesson. I'll talk to you all again very soon for lesson number 5. Until then, take care of yourselves and bye-bye.